And Mark, we'll share this on the YouTube channel we've got so that people who've missed it can see it too. So yeah, welcome to us, Experts at Work, which is on working with cancer. So this session is for members of all three of our networks, as you know, and we're recording this one. Big welcome to Mark. Mark Guymer is CEO of the charity Cancer Support UK. One of our network members introduced Mark to us and their work, and their charities of obvious relevance to the network. So really glad to have you on, Mark. Mark's got some quite striking figures and very relevant points to make on how we work with cancer in the workplace and generally. There's no breakout rooms for this one. We've got a half finish at 11:45. Do send us questions and suggestions via chat throughout. Put yourself on mute for now if you would, if you haven't already. It looks like you all have, but not you, Mark. That wouldn't be the same. And Mark, the floor is yours, and thank you again for doing it.
Thank you, Richard, and very pleased to be here to talk about this topic. I always start these conversations by just saying to people that we're obviously here to talk about cancer, and as you'll see as we go through the presentation, we touch upon some key insights and themes that we've learned as a charity. I'm always very conscious that you're talking to people that you don't know and you don't know what their experiences are. So I always just say, look, as I'm talking about certain topics, it can sometimes really strike a chord or really impact somebody who may have had a personal experience. Then obviously it goes without saying that sometimes people feel that they need to even leave the presentation. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that I'm available. If anybody is impacted by anything I say, do feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will come up afterwards, and I can just check that you're okay, or have a follow-up conversation if helpful. So I'm going to share my screen. Always comes up on the wrong thing. Let's just see. Okay. Is that okay, Richard? Does that come up on it? Yep, good. Okay. So, as Richard said, I'm the CEO of a national charity called Cancer Support UK. So we're a fully registered charity, not-for-profit organisation, and I've been with the organisation for 3 years. We've been around for more than 20 years now as a national charity, but in the last 6 or 7 years, we've really had to refocus on what we're delivering as a service. You will all know the names and brands of other big charities that are out there, and for us it's really important that we focus in on an area that we feel is underserved, so that we're doing something that really adds value and tackles a problem that we feel needs tackling. And you'll see that through me just introducing some of the work we've done, how we get to this key theme that we're talking about today, which is the impact of cancer in the workplace, people working with cancer, and the impact of communication upon those people. So Cancer Support UK has a very simple mission in some ways, which is creating a kinder world for people living with cancer. And we do this by providing a number of services, which we describe as providing practical and emotional support when it is most needed. And I'm just going to very quickly highlight the 3 key services that we provide, because again, that leads nicely into the insights that we've gathered around this topic that I think relate to us as an audience. So the first thing that we do is we provide free cancer kits to anybody that's had a cancer diagnosis. So people often, when they receive a cancer diagnosis, things happen very, very quickly. Not always the case, but very often what the healthcare system is trying to do is increasingly, as somebody is identified at risk, is trying to get them in for tests, diagnose them as quickly as possible, and then get them into treatment as quickly as possible. And these instances can often happen at breakneck speed. So people often are they're not even in shock, because you don't have time to go into shock. You're literally just into the system. And we, through some insight from people with lived experience, we receive feedback that there were certain items that really help people when they're undergoing treatment. And so we've worked with healthcare professionals, people impacted by cancer, to develop 4 different types of kits, which are relevant to different people going through cancer. One of the goals we've set ourselves for next year is that unfortunately around about 2,000 children are diagnosed with cancer every year, and we do what we call a kids kit. And this year was the first year where we've made our kids kits completely available all year round. So we'll never say no to any child that tries to, or parents of a child or carer of a child who orders a kit. We will always fulfill that order. We've delivered over 1,000 kits this year, and by next year we want to ensure that if they want a kit, every single child who's diagnosed will get one. I was talking to Richard earlier and just mentioned that we always run a Christmas campaign which supports our work in this area. So we currently have people going around the country, one of them dressed as a giant bear at the moment, where it's called our Cuddles for Christmas campaign, where we deliver special sensory bears to every child that's going into hospital over the Christmas period. So it's 1,200 bears that will go all around the UK to every major hospital that deals with treating children with cancer. All of this is funded by our donors. But the important thing about this is that the insight that we've gathered from people impacted in this area is that the bears that we send out, I called it a sensory bear, they're bears that can be heated up in a microwave to provide extra warmth for the child, which can help with anxiety, it can help with discomfort. They're also lavender scented, which helps with anxiety, and they're weighted, which also helps with anxiety. So it's just an example of how the things that we do are always guided by the people that are impacted. The second service that we provide is around the emotional support, and this really feeds into the core theme that we're going to talk about today. We call it Cancer Coach, but one of the things that we identified a few years ago was this increasing problem that people were finishing their physical cancer treatment and they were describing the experience as falling over the edge of a cliff. And what they meant by that was that, as I said, when you go into treatment, the healthcare service generally is very good at putting its arms around you. It will tell you where you need to be, what you need to do, and people go into survival mode. Once you finish your physical treatment, you're kind of told that you're okay, come back and have a test, you go into remission. The loved ones around you are obviously delighted because you've come through the treatment, the best possible outcome. And there is an expectation, whether it's said out aloud or whether it's an underlying expectation, that you will be over the moon. You were one of those people that have beat cancer. The harsh reality is that most people at some point in their recovery after the physical treatment won't feel like that. The data from a major piece of research by Macmillan suggests that about 78% of people struggle emotionally even when they've completed their cancer treatment. So there's various reasons for that, but this is the key piece of insight that feeds into the work that we've been doing with organisations. And next year we aim to open that free service up through innovation, providing it in different formats, digital services, etc., to over 10,000 individuals. And then finally, we have the workplace training, which we developed about 3 years ago. And we developed this because we were hearing from people who were doing the Cancer Coach service as we were trying to understand where they were facing some of their biggest challenges. We were consistently hearing that returning back to the workplace following their treatment was proving very difficult for them. So we sort of delved into that to try and understand what was going on. And it actually wasn't to do with a workplace trying to do the right thing. So often the workplace would have the right policies in place. Because obviously somebody who's been, as I'm sure you all know, been diagnosed with cancer is protected by the Disability Act. So organisations were very good at sort of trying to support people with some sort of flexibility. what we were finding is that actually it was how their colleagues were responding to them returning to work, which was causing the biggest problem. So about 55% of all the people who do our cancer coach service say that they have really struggled going back to work, and this is one of the key reasons. And this comes to the fact that there's still a huge stigma associated with cancer. You just say the word and it can have a very strong impact on people, whether they've been impacted or not. And lots of assumptions are made about cancer. So there's a real stigma around it, and people often really struggle to talk about it, and certainly struggle to connect to somebody that's been impacted by it. And we'll talk about this a bit more. But we were approached by not just people that were struggling to return to work. We were actually getting approached more and more by organizations who were starting to see in their own data and their own experiences with their employees that there was a challenge here and there was a problem. So you will see that many organizations do cancer awareness days, and that's really good. That's really helpful. It does create a conversation. It encourages people to be more aware of what they can do to be looking after themselves and on the guard for anything that may need checking. But this is something that's very different. So just at a very high level, it's worth touching upon some of the irreversible trends that are worth being aware of. 1 in 2 of us will be diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately. There are currently in the UK an estimated 3.5 million people who are living with cancer. This is estimated in the next few years to grow to 4 million. And I think by 2040, it's predicted to be somewhere in the region of about 5.5 million people. So it's growing at an extremely fast rate as we get better at diagnosing people and treating people. I mentioned this, that 78% of those diagnosed have unmet emotional needs. And importantly for this group, it's over 1 million people that have been diagnosed that are of working age. Sometimes when you mention cancer to people, they think of elderly people, and that is certainly a large demographic in terms of people affected by cancer. But the fastest growing demographics are actually younger people and people of working age. So there is something here to be aware of. 55%, I said, of our cancer coach participants say they needed more support at work. 87% of managers feel unprepared, and 85% of those in treatment and post-treatment have reported an increase in anxiety. And that can come to people a few weeks after their treatment, a few months, sometimes a few years later. So why do we want to tackle the problem? Some of this is quite obvious, but it's worth saying that there's reasons for all of us to want to try and improve the situation. It's something that unfortunately is going to impact us all at some stage. So if we think about the workplace, we estimate that around about 5% of any organisation, statistically, 5% of the staff will be directly impacted by cancer. So that could be a diagnosis for themselves, or they could be caring for a loved one who's been diagnosed. But actually, if you think about the people that will have grandparents, the people that will have other relatives or friends who are impacted, the percentage of people that are impacted by this is actually much higher. So from a business perspective, we're very aware as we work with many organizations that there are always challenges on what are the things that you're going to tackle as an organization to develop the culture of the organization, support your employees. We believe that there's an incredible return on investment for tackling this particular area. So obviously supporting recovery is important, reducing absenteeism, improving the retention of key staff will all be things that you're very familiar with. But as I've said, if you don't address this issue in terms of not the person who's been impacted by the cancer, but your broader staff. By building knowledge and capability, this has the unfortunate impact across the organisation. So those directly impacted, but also the people who are trying to support others, will also be impacted. We talk about managers being provided with skills and confidence to have conversations. The training that we provide, the work that we do with organisations, this is highly transferable and very valuable skills. So we do a lot of work around active listening. We make sure that people understand that when you're dealing with a topic like this, even though it's very common and unfortunately there's a lot of it around, every individual will have a different experience and will need to be treated differently. So how you then communicate with those individuals is very, very important. And the best example I can give to highlight that is that if you're talking to somebody who's been impacted by cancer, if you listen to how they talk about it, people will generally fall into one of two camps. It's almost a sort of 50-50 split. There are those who talk about battling and fighting cancer, and there are those that actually find that type of language really difficult and upsetting. And it's because they see that this is a disease that they've got. They didn't choose to get it, and they can often feel quite guilty that they haven't fought hard enough if they've got any ongoing issues around this, or they're feeling uncomfortable. Then using that battle type of language can actually be very detrimental to how you interact with that individual and how they feel afterwards. So we do a lot of work around this type of area. And obviously improving employee brand, staff morale, motivation, etc., all things that everyone's aware of. So trying to finish up on a sort of positive note, there's lots there which, we're heading towards Christmas and it's all very downbeat potentially. But the good news is that organisations are becoming more and more aware of this challenge, and by tackling it, the benefits that it can provide. So there's a small range of organisations that we work with here. One that may surprise people is that we were approached and had a discussion with Bart's Health Trust, part of the NHS, 21,000 staff, second biggest cancer hospital in the UK, London Air Ambulance is based there, etc. And even they recognised that this was something that they weren't addressing for their own employees. So we now provide training through an e-learning module that we've developed, which is available to all 21,000 staff at Bart's Health Trust, and we hope that that will be rolled out across the whole NHS in the coming months. So that's hopefully I haven't overrun too much, but that's my core presentation. There's my contact details there, and I think, as Richard said, he'll share that. So I'll stop sharing my presentation for now.
Thank you so much, Mark. You definitely haven't overrun. That was really neat and to the point. Thank you, and very thorough as well. Before I ask people to come in and for their questions and reflections as well, Mark, I was just going to say, you've covered some of the things that you recommend and that you do. If you were to advise organisations to do, say, one or two simple things, what would you say?
It's a good question. I think organisations are very good at having the right policies in place to support people. Our learning is that because often the policies are quite broad and will cover a broad range of disabilities and issues, people who are impacted directly by this don't connect to those policies. So it's challenging because there are so many things that organisations need to now be aware of to support people, and mental health is one that, certainly in the last few years has had a lot of headlines and a lot of investment. But we hear from people that, unless you're talking about cancer in a way that they can relate to, that these policies miss the mark. we sort of hear it again. A lot of organizations now offer very comprehensive employee assistance programs, which are very good. It's a very positive thing, but we consistently hear that that's not the fundamental issue or fundamental support that the people we're talking to need. So I think an organization needs to think very carefully about how they present this particular topic in a way that relates to the people that are impacted. There was a survey recently that suggested as many as 50% of people don't even tell their organization, or certainly are very nervous about telling their organization that they've had a cancer diagnosis. And we hear again about people using holiday to go to treatment. And there's a whole list of reasons for that, and it's different by different organizations. So you've got to be a little bit careful with that type of data. But it does give an indication about the sort of scale of the problem.
Good answer, thanks. That's very, very striking, almost 50%. And I presume with the policies, though, network members will know far better than I that in a well-meaning attempt to be inclusive as possible, they probably end up quite wide and general, but perhaps not as specific as cancer sufferers particularly need. I'm guessing. Well, network members, what do you think? What questions would you like to ask Mark, or reflections or challenges for him, indeed, in the nicest possible way, Mark? Do feel free to pop in. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like. It's at the top, or just shout out. It's a nice small group. So yeah, what are your thoughts? Katie, hello.
Hiya, Richard. Hiya, Mark. Thank
Hello.
you for that. It's always very what's the word I'm looking for? Puts things into perspective when hearing a presentation like that. And we're all sort of worried about other things. We unfortunately lost one of our colleagues to cancer on Monday night, and it's, and I can see the need for support and for the individual and the family as well. But actually, the impact has a bit of a ripple effect across people that have worked with that individual and that team. We knew it was coming, but it's still just awful. What would you recommend for support, in that scenario for the team that he used to work with, either closely or even, some people that didn't work that closely have been quite impacted by that news?
Yeah, so again, as it won't surprise you that often an organization will contact us when they've been through a situation like this. And I think there's a few things that you need to consider. And I think one is that trying to do something, this might sound a bit strange, but trying to do something too quickly after an event such as that is probably not what we would advise, because often it can be perceived in the wrong way. So you might have some people who sort of think, oh, why now are we doing events around cancer or training around cancer? So some of the things that we do, you would definitely say, okay, we need to be very careful about how we do this. It comes back to, I think, supporting the team, because everybody will respond differently. And so giving them access to some kind of opportunity to talk to, I mean, ideally, it would be people who would be independent and outside of the organization. So setting up something with someone to allow them to make contact with people who know a bit about this topic would be ultimately what you would try and do. You might find people don't feel they need to use that service, but I think that's what we would recommend as sort of good working practice. That's not we don't do the sort of one-to-one emotional support in that way. So that wouldn't be a service we would do. We would certainly know people to recommend for that. But I think the biggest thing I would say is to try and, one of the biggest problems with cancer is people feel really uncomfortable talking about it. And, what we would recommend is a very honest and open conversation with people, recognizing that, people will be feeling the way that they're feeling. And it's not just about cancer. This is about the loss of somebody. So again, it's about bereavement and what that entails, but it's really important that people have those conversations in my view, so that it's addressed. The issues we see with individuals coming to us is where things haven't been addressed or discussed, and the problem builds and builds to the point where it becomes, for somebody, a really significant problem. And I think that's maybe what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Really
and
sorry
I'm
to
sorry,
hear
I'm
that.
sorry to hear, just sorry to hear that. It's not a nice thing to do, and a nice thing to happen. And we do hear, again and again, how these events have that ripple effect across an organization. It's very common, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really sorry to hear that, Katie. That's obviously one of the toughest things in the workplace, full stop, or for HR people. If I may ask, what's your instinct in terms of next steps?
To Mark's point, interesting one actually, around sort of letting the dust settle a little bit. I think it was the only, we had conversations yesterday, so it's about letting people process it. And I guess, some sort of offering of bereavement counselling is what we would normally do, but I didn't know if there was anything else that we could or should be doing in this scenario. Obviously we offer it, but it's up to the individual to take it. But I guess at least they've got that option if they feel the need.
Yeah. I mean, we had one recently. It was a senior director who was been at the organisation for a very long time, so it was really well known, very well connected. It was only 1,000 employees, so was able to have reasonably close relationship with many of them, and their approach was one of, very much offering that instant support to anyone that felt they needed it. They did want to do something because they felt they wanted to show that there was something that they could do, almost not, it sounds wrong, but to honour the individual, but it was actually in memory of them. And so we've sort of planned to do something. It's 3 months later than the event, but we're going to do some stuff with them around building awareness of cancer, offering training within the organisation, but also look at whether we do some fundraising activities, just as a way for the team to feel like they're actually doing something, because people want to, some people want to take action, almost like a physical action. So it's not, we're not looking to raise thousands of pounds. It's more about doing an event where people can feel like they're taking some action and doing something, which can have a really, it's taking something that's really difficult and trying to, move forwards with that story.
Yeah, thank you. It's really useful.
I think just to build on that, we've had 2 similar situations recently, one bereavement through cancer and one bereavement through an accident a colleague had outside of work. And we've used a company called Self Space. They do grief counselling. So we've set up some sessions in the office, in the location that they happened. It both happened in the same location, actually, quite close apart, close together. So they were really good, and it was a kind of an option for colleagues to attend. But I think, as to Mark's point, we left it, a few weeks before we set that up to really, check the mood of the team and, see what support was needed, and didn't, try and act on something straight away. So, but they were really good, and we've used them a couple of times now for those kind of situations.
Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's a huge help. Is it any reflections you had? And really sorry to hear that, by the way. So that's very tough. Any reflections you had on the support you gave and how it worked?
I think it's don't assume. Don't assume that people will want to talk straight away. Don't assume that people open up. I think it's for one of the colleagues, they've been here for I think just short of 20 years. And they were diagnosed with cancer, and it was, they had a sort of 12 months battle with that, whether that's the right word or not, to Mark's point. But they were definitely battling it, and they went up and down in their treatment. But I think it's just still checking in with the team, to make sure that, you know, people deal with grief in different ways, and actually it may not have settled straight away. So we're still kind of on that support journey with colleagues. So yeah.
Thanks, Tony. We appreciate it. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
Richard,
think-
can I just ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Mark, at Cancer Support UK, do you offer a sort of service to employers where people can come in and sort of just look, and recognising what you said around policies and procedures and people not often connecting with them, but is there anything that you do to just do a little bit of an assessment as to what is currently in place and how organisations have dealt with some of these issues that we've sort of talked about, just to make sure that, you know, the basics are in place, and then clearly as events happen, you'll respond as you deem appropriate for those sort of individual sessions, but just to make sure, you know, the lot of the groundwork stuff is in place?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and so in terms of making sure you have really good, robust policies in place and relating it to the topic of cancer, we always actually refer people to Macmillan, because you can go on their website, and we can maybe share the link afterwards, but it's a really comprehensive piece of work they've done, and you can download a full pack which will have lots of information around this. Touching upon one of the things that we've talked about, though, and part of your question there, is that when we work with organisations, we do that piece where we kind of say, okay, let's take a more literal look at this to see how your culture as an organisation represents this, how you share the information, how you use the information, specifically from our perspective, tackling this challenge that we know there will be people within your organisation who will be impacted in different ways. So the very sad examples we've talked about are unfortunately the ones that organizations are aware of, and the good thing is it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen where we have a colleague directly impacted, or we lose a colleague. The bit we don't see and hear about, and you won't hear talked about very much, is people who are losing maybe a member of the family. We'll get some of that. I use my own personal experience when I worked in the commercial sector. I was working for a FTSE 100 company, very pressurized job, had very demanding targets to achieve in a business unit, and I lost my mum through cancer. Surprise, it came as a bit of a sort of happened very quickly, and I didn't even tell my boss. So I, took one day's holiday, and I sort of carried on. And I don't feel particularly good about that. It was kind of the situation I was in at the time. But what we know is that this is something that people do, and they do it a lot. And this is the bit that goes under the surface, under the radar, that we really want to sort of get the message out to organizations that this is all around you. And it's not the organization's fault. It's just nobody's been talking about this topic and thought about the things you could do to address it. And if you think about going back to sort of putting my business hat on, if you think about the potential impact for you as a business, just one employee deciding that it's all too much and they're going to leave or they're going to step away, what is the cost of replacing that employee? I think there's a very strong case to look at this as an issue and say, well, if we do some educational stuff, if we bring some basic skills into the organization, and start that conversation, this is going to be really beneficial for us.
That help, Jackie?
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any other points people would like to raise?
Richard, just one thing that might be worth mentioning that we put in place a number of years ago was, and it seems like such an obvious initiative, but it's proven to be really supportive as a buddy scheme. So for anybody that's, whether they're going through cancer themselves or whether it's a loved one, whether that's friends or family, we ask people to consider whether they would volunteer, having had some lived experience in whatever way that might be, just to sort of connect and pair up with people to provide that support. And again, they just work out between them what that looks like. So that was quite a nice thing. And people that had the lived experience were really, in general, not everybody, but the majority were really keen to do that and provide that support.
Nice thought, Jackie.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And actually, just a quick shout out to you and the team, because you shared so much over the last year. Really appreciate it. Lots of policies and strategies, and much appreciated. Well, everyone. Mark, really appreciate you taking us through this really useful presentation. Such an important subject, and appreciate the network members sharing as well. Good luck to everyone with all the things that you're currently handling. Katie and Danny, I'm thinking of you two particularly, and their teams. For now, we've got the 2025 programs, as I say, in your inboxes, and the diary invitations will follow soon. Very nice to see you all. Wishing you all an excellent Christmas. And Mark, thank you again.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thanks,
good
Richard.
Christmas.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Bye.